He was running, there he is. I can see him coming down the hall. He rides public transportation. So we are going to continue with our workshop, and I believe Ms. Maxwell is up. Good morning, Mr. Donahue. I let everyone, we tried to hold off. Sorry the bus was late. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. Joanne Maxwell from VDOT. I'm going to be giving you a legislative update. My plan is to just present you with the latest and greatest that's happened since your last legislative update, which means basically we've now had the reconvened session and we know much more about the status of certain bills that it's prior to the reconvened session were somewhat up in the air. So that being said, there first couple of bills, what I'm going to do is give you updates regarding several key bills, legislation. But then the other thing I wanted to do is provide you with a sense of the number of studies, new studies that we have to do as a result of this session of the General Assembly. And by that I mean studies that are going to be probably of interest to the CTB. So that being said, first three bills on this slide I wanted to talk to you about. They're basically safety related, and they impact how VDOT does business, how VDOT manages its operations in some form or fashion. First bill is HB 1911. Currently in Virginia, there's a move-over law. And that law requires drivers who are approaching vehicles that are stationary on the side of the road that have red, blue, or yellow flashing lights to move over. If you fail to move over in compliance with that law, you could be cited for a traffic infraction. During this past session, HB 1911 changed that law such that failure to move over in accord with the law would constitute reckless driving. And that came about as a result of some of the very significant and severe incidents that have happened in the last year with regard to emergency responders. When the bill left the legislature, the Senate, the conference committee decided to pull out certain vehicles from under the protection, I'll call it, of the reckless driving offense. Basically, when the bill left the legislature, the bill made it reckless driving for failure to move over for vehicles bearing, in essence, red lights and blue flashing lights. The vehicles bearing yellow flashing lights, such as VDOT incident responders, tow vehicles, if a person failed to move over for those, it still remained a traffic infraction. So when it got to the governor's desk, the governor decided to provide or propose amendments to that bill. Basically, the amendment would have rendered failure to move over for any of those vehicles, whether they had blue lights, red lights, or yellow flashing lights, make it a reckless driving offense. The House concurred with the governor's amendments. The Senate rejected the governor's amendments. So now what's going to happen is the bill's now going back to the governor in the form that it passed the legislature to begin with, meaning that right now it would be a reckless driving offense for failure to move over for vehicles bearing red or blue lights, and it remains a traffic infraction if you fail to move over for vehicles bearing yellow flashing lights, such as VDOT incident management vehicles. The governor's options in this case would be one, to veto the bill, 2, to do nothing, or 3, to sign the bill. In the latter two cases, the bill would become law July 1st.
Chair, could I ask Joanne a question? Joanne, I remember that bill trickling around. Is that there's some language in the bill, if I remember correctly, that allows if you can't get over, and I'm not sure what that language is, but I know the public needs to understand. You don't wreck your car to get over.
Madam Chair, that's exactly right. The way the language reads, we use short term to call it the move over law, but basically the law says if it's safe to move over, move over. If it's not, slow down, exercise due care. So you're exactly right. The next bill is also another safety-related bill. SB 1521, introduced by Senator Carrico, would allow Virginia State Police to utilize photo speed monitoring in work zones. And what that means is they can basically use a handheld device, take a picture of a speeder, cite the speeder via mail, and they would be allowed to do this only in properly marked work zones. So basically it was a safety enhancement for basically work zones, for speed enforcement in work zones. It's safety enhancement because, number one, it's more effective means of enforcement, but number two, it means state police don't have to, in order to catch a speeder in essence, or to cite a speeder in a going through a work zone, they don't have to pull out, interfere with traffic, risk, incidents. The legislation passed the Senate and the House. When it got to the governor's desk, the governor sought an amendment that would basically require reenactment of the legislation in 2020, and then also, in the meantime, to have the Secretary of Public Safety and other law enforcement-related entities to study the constitutionality and legality of the fees that would be collected pursuant to these violations. Of not going to the literary fund. Under the law, under the Constitution, fines have to go to the literary fund. In this case, the monetary funds that would be collected would be going to state police and to some other, I believe it was to the HMOF. I'm not sure if that's correct, but bottom line, the governor wanted somebody to take a hard look at that to make sure the law is constitutional. So that means right now the bill is in somewhat of a state of limbo. It will have to be reenacted next year to become effective. Third item of legislation here, another safety one, a safety-related item, involves use of handheld personal communication devices in work zones. Basically, this law prohibits use of handheld personal communication devices. That means talking, texting, in work zones. The legislation passed the Senate and the House. The governor proposed amendments that would have rendered this legislation a flat-out ban on use of handheld personal communication devices. There was legislation this session that also would have accomplished that. That legislation failed at the last minute during the General Assembly session. So the governor's amendment, number one, would have made this a flat-out ban on use of handheld personal devices while operating a vehicle, and it also provided an exemption for certain VDOT vehicles engaged in incident response. Reason being, we had sought that amendment because we oftentimes, when we're engaged in incidents, it's necessary to make very quick phone calls to communicate very quickly in order to facilitate incident management. The House concurred in the governor's amendments, but the Senate concurred in the governor's amendment, but the House rejected it, cited the amendment as not being germane. So the way the status of the law, assuming it'll again be going to the governor's desk, and he'll have those three options. Assuming the governor agrees to the current or the existing form of legislation, it will be illegal to use a handheld personal communication device when you're driving through a work zone. The next item I just put in as a placeholder, and Nick has already spoken to you all about that, and that's the I-81. Basically, the funding options or the funding mechanisms that are now in place were funded or were established by means of a governor's amendment to the legislation. Several other items that were will now be law as a result of governor's amendments. They were amendments to the budget. First item is Amendment 19, and this amendment requires the Secretary of Transportation to evaluate opportunities for mitigating financial burden on commuters at the downtown and midtown tunnel and Hampton roads. That particular report is due June 30, 2020, and the General Assembly has concurred in that amendment. Next, Amendment 20, and I believe this involves HRBT, Nick, This amendment creates a HOV requirement of at least 2 for any hot lane PPTA facility with initial construction cost of over $3 billion and whose operation, maintenance, or financing is not a result of the same comprehensive agreement for the facility's construction. Obviously, I think that would apply to HRBT and any other facility that meets that requirement or those criteria.
And Ms. Maxwell, and the purpose behind this is previously all express lanes operations that were a part of a PPTA had involved private financing. This is the first time where a PPTA had been used to construct a project, mostly because we were trying to provide flexibility to the designers and contractors with regard to whether they used an immersed or bored tunnel or certain other types of design. And so I don't think when the code was originally constructed, it was envisioned that there would be a PPTA procured project that would involve express lanes that did not involve financing of the project by the private entity. And so this amendment just gives flexibility for a very narrowly tailored set of projects, today only the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, that would then allow those projects constructed on the PPTA to have a lower occupancy requirement if that is what is ultimately determined. It would not stop you all as the board or working with the region from saying HOV3 is the right occupancy requirement. It simply provides additional flexibility saying 2 may be appropriate in this instance since there is no private financing involved.
Mr. Williams.
Just so the 2 is free, a single is paying?
That's correct.
Or we could make it 3.
I understand.
Madam Chair. The third item on this page, Secretary Valentine had asked me to mention to you all, under current law in Virginia, a person can be suspended, their driver's license can be suspended for failure to pay fines and costs, even if the underlying offense had nothing to do with driving. The governor proposed amendments that basically would prohibit, and that were agreed to by the General Assembly, that basically prohibited a court from suspending a person's driver's license solely because they failed to pay fines and costs. As a result of that, also, there are reinstatement fees that a person has to pay. Those reinstatement fees are being waived, and so the amendments also provided some relief to DMV, who collects those fees. Now, this is the second part of my presentation, dealing with the new studies and reports that are required by the 2019 session. There are actually several more that various agencies have to do, but I think these are of most interest to this body. First one is a budget amendment, or a budget item. It requires the Secretaries of Natural Resources and Transportation to convene a stakeholders group to assess the transfer of sponsorship and maintenance support of the Virginia Capitol Trail to the Department of Conservation and Recreation. The assessment is due October 1 of 2019. So that's the first new item. Next is another budget item, and Nick has talked to you all about this already. I think he's given a fairly thorough presentation, but bottom line, it's a requirement that the Secretary of Transportation and the CTB direct VDOT to establish a working group to evaluate the impact of increased fuel efficiency, hybrid vehicles, the impact of those vehicles on transportation funding, reduced fuel usage, et cetera. The report of findings with regard to that evaluation and review is due December 10th, 2019. The next item is again, I've already talked about this, and this is the report that's due from the Secretary relating to relief of financial burdens on commuters using the ERC facilities. Whoops.
Question on HB 1700. What would prompt that study? Why would we want to transfer the oversight and care of that Capitol Trail to Department of Natural Resources? We worked long and hard to get that in place. It was quite a battle.
Madam Chair, it's my understanding that there is a small group of individuals that are interested in seeing that happen. I'm not sure that it's necessarily one that it's not, I don't believe it's anything that's been coming from this administration, from VDOT or even perhaps natural resources. I think it's a private individual that has an interest, and I don't know all the details.
So it may be a single individual that's driving that.
Potentially, Madam Chair, I think that's the case.
I mean, I don't think we can say that, but we're always happy to look at it.
Sure, of course,
Yeah.
of course.
The next page, the next couple of items or reports. First one is HB 2315. This HB 2315 was a bill that required VDOT to do a study of infrastructure that was at risk of flooding and provide recommendations to address the infrastructure, those needs. The bill failed. However, this year, House Rules Committee made it fairly clear that even though they were leaving a lot of legislation on the table, that they were going to be issuing letters asking the relevant agencies to do studies anyway, or to evaluate the issues. This is one of those cases. VDOT has just received in the last couple of weeks a letter from the House Rules Chair asking VDOT to identify transportation infrastructure at risk of wind or tidal flooding and make recommendations to address such infrastructure. The letter asked that we have that report ready and provide it to the chair of House Transportation, the chair of Rules, and to the patron of the bill, Delegate Hodges. Next report is, the next two reports come about, these were bills, these two items, legislative items, dealt with smart scale. And they wanted, basically the bill sought to change some of the prioritization or the factors in smart scale. First bill, HB 2326, would have made whether or not a project involved a primary evacuation route a very prominent factor in smart scale. And because of some of the issues surrounding evacuation routes, resiliency, flooding, the House, basically House Transportation Committee, declined to let the bill go forward. But we did receive indications that more than likely the chair will be issuing a letter asking us to look at some of those issues that were discussed. Similar situation with HB 2633. This bill would have made congestion mitigation really a top factor in consideration of smart scale. I think Nick probably talked about this as well. But bottom line, it would have said if the bill had passed, smart scale would have had to have taken into consideration congestion mitigation, and if a project mitigated congestion, it took priority over other projects that did not mitigate congestion, such as safety projects. Again, there was a lot of discussion in the committee about this bill, and there are indications that the chair will issue a letter asking us to look at some of the issues that were discussed during committee. The next item, again, is something, the next two reports are reports, and Nick has already, again, talked to you all at great length about I-81, but bottom line, there'll be two reports that are due coming out of the I-81 legislation. One will be due from the CTB. That's due 12/15 or December 15th of each year. And then the next one is one that'll be due from the I-81 committee. That report is also going to be due December 15th of 2019. The next item, I know you've heard quite a bit about this this item or bill, but I did want to point out there are basically three things that are going to be due as a result of this legislation. The first is in essence a repeat or a similar study and report as was required last year for vital infrastructure. Basically, this legislation requires CTB to undertake a comprehensive review of current and future condition of pavement and bridges in the Commonwealth. At a minimum, the CTB is to consider current conditions performance targets of pavement and bridges, consider current investment strategies of the HMOF and State of Good Repair programs. CTB is to recommend new performance targets for pavements and bridges with sustainable performance for over a 20-year period. And finally, to develop investment strategies for the HMOF and State of Good Repair program to achieve those sustainable performance targets, et cetera. Again, that report is due December 1st, 2019. The next item, this bill also has an enactment clause that really was the result of other legislation that did not pass, but nevertheless the General Assembly saw it fit to add this to this bill. And basically it asked the CTB to review the feasibility of using the PPTA to design, build, operate, maintain the Norris Bridge and the Downing Bridge. So that's going to be another review that's required. Finally, the last item, and I might need to back up a minute on that one, requires the commissioner to report on the use of the monies in the, like RNBS3, as I like to call it, fund. That report is going to be due 11/30 of each year. Now, I know you all are aware that at this point, that fund has not been funded. However, the legislation does say that the CTB, it says that the CTB shall, after July 1, 2020, dedicate monies to the fund based on this first study that you were doing, that's called for in this slide. And again, it is a shall. It does not dictate the amounts or anything like that, but it does nevertheless direct CTB to dedicate funds to that fund. The next item, the next two items, HB 2800 and SB 1775, were carry forwards in essence, or the after effect of a study that VDOT did this past session, or for this past session. VDOT had been asked to look at the implications of the Commonwealth entering into a pilot, a federal pilot, that would allow overweight trucks, heavier trucks to operate on the interstates. Again, we did a study. This pilot was has never been enacted by the feds or the federal government, and it was just, in essence, a hypothetical. One of the recommendations we made in that study, last year's study, we basically said in order for a pilot to be effective or for us to participate, it would need to provide some it would need to constitute a study, a very valid study. There would need to be a lot of data that we would be gathering, and it was somewhat costly. So as a follow-on, these two bills were introduced to encourage VDOT, I think, to take a harder look at the data that we do have associated with overweight vehicles. So as a result, VDOT is going to be looking at what kind of information we do have with regard to overweight trucks. And that report is actually an ongoing. It's going to be an annual report for the next couple of years. The bill sunsets January 1, 2021, but in the meantime, we will need to do two reports, one in December of 2019 and then another one in December of 2020. The next item is the I-95 corridor study. Nick has already talked to you at length about that, those items, or that item of legislation. Bottom line, the report that's due under that legislation is due the first day of the 2020 session. The next report that may be of interest, VDOT had introduced or sought introduction of legislation this year that would have imposed a sign inspection requirement on those signs whose height basically rendered them a threat to public safety, traffic safety on the interstates. The legislation was prompted by the Potomac Mill sign incident, and we determined that it might be necessary for owners of these signs to be taking a more careful look or keep better tabs on the state of condition of these signs. The legislation did not pass. However, it actually made it through the Senate, but when it got to the House, it floundered. And it's the expectation, it's not clear that we'd be expecting a letter to study this, but nevertheless, the stakeholders, sign owners, et cetera, that were engaged in the discussions we've all committed to looking at this issue and to seeing if we can't come up with legislation that would basically be something that that the sign owners could agree to, and that VDOT could agree to, and potentially localities could agree to. So we'll be working on that in the next few months. Again, there's no due date per se, but we would like to have something, a resolution, before it's time to pre-file legislation. The next item is SJR 254. This involves a study of the Dulles Greenway. Basically, the resolution directs VDOT to study the feasibility of purchasing all or part of the Dulles Greenway, and to look at other factors for mitigating the tolls on the Greenway. And then one other thing, we've done studies regarding the Greenway before, but one other thing we've been asked to look at, which I don't believe we've looked at before, and that is looking at the concept, the feasibility of establishing distance-based tolling on the Greenway. That report is due the first day of the 2020 General Assembly session. HB 2737 is a study that DRPT is required to do. Basically, it just requires DRPT in conjunction with relevant stakeholders to evaluate the placement, maintenance cost, and potential funding sources for highway signs that would indicate the presence direction of nearby Amtrak or intercity passenger rail stations, and then also to promote the use of those services. That report's due December 1, 2020. HJR 629 is finally the last item. I think this item may end up being obviated by the budget item that requires the Secretary to study toll mitigation on the ERC facilities. This legislation would have required JLARC to study that, the issues with regard to tolling on the ERC facilities, and to find or look at ways to mitigate those tolls. The legislation failed, but nevertheless, again, the committees, what they were doing with the JLARC studies and what they've started doing is they basically send all of the JLARC, or the legislation proposing JLARC studies, to a committee, and the committee decides what JLARC is going to study. I think in this case, if this report were to, if this item were to pass, the report would be due 12/1/2020. Again, the fact that the Secretary has been asked to look at this, it may obviate the need, and JLARC may forego this. That's all I have. Again, these are new.
That's all you have?
Well, with regard to new studies and reports, and I would stress there are still going to be some of the prior studies and reports that this body is going to have to do. What comes to mind, I think this will be the first year for OIP to do their biennial report. And I believe that's due November 1 or November 30. So,
Madam Chairman?
Mr. Miller.
I think the other members might like to be aware that the HR TAC also has a group studying the same issue, which to make recommendations. Obviously, they can't do anything to change it. They're not a party to the agreement. But they have a group of folks that's looking at the same issue in terms of how to mitigate tolls to commuters there. So lots of action on that point.
Of action, and I will tell you that Mr. Shepard, Chairman Shepard, and he called me about the task force that's been put together, and John Reinhardt, who is the CEO at the Port of Virginia, is also on that. I think what's really important, and I was really appreciative of the fact that they let me know this, is that we need to all be working with the same information. So the AG's office, I have reached out to Don Anderson, who is now our liaison with the AG's office, and with Jeff, to make sure that we have a very clear understanding of the impact of those contracts. So.
One other thing I'd like to mention, we plan on meeting with the Secretary's office and coming up with a plan. Given the significance of many of these studies and the due dates, we're going to be sitting down and coming up with a plan of implementation, so to speak, very soon. So we'll keep you apprised of those details once we've hammered those out.
Yes, we're going to come up with a master grid of how we're doing it. I will say, and I welcome any of your thoughts and comments. The vast majority of this work we are doing, plan to do, and know how important it is. So a part of me is somewhat relieved that the General Assembly and the governor understand that this work has to be done. So it's having that authority to get it done, as well as the support to get them done. So that part is really great. I will say that the work that the CTB, Deputy Secretary Donahue, Ben Minnell, and others, the work they did on 81 has kind of set a path for how you can actually study something, create a great plan, and then figure out how to implement it. So I think it set a stage for us. So in a certain way, it is a complement to much of the work that's been done here. But we are really, you can see the challenges as far as trying to get everything else accomplished, making sure that we also get this work done. So any thoughts or comments? Mr. Williams?
Please.
A lot. Pardon me?
Work.
So the only thing that I can say is some of this work we are already doing. And so that part, you know, we're trying to incorporate, you know, the desires of the General Assembly and making sure that we're aligning them. Okay, well, thank you very much. I think we have a meeting coming up very soon, and I know that Amy White is also very instrumental in trying to keep us organized, so thank you.
Thank you.
I just thought that presentation was really important for y'all to hear, so you know what's coming out this year and what some of the priorities will be. So let's see, I think, we'll go to Ms. Jennifer Mitchell.
I just have a couple announcements, and this is something that I mentioned in the Rail Committee yesterday, but I did want to note that our Amtrak ridership continues to increase. We had a increase for March of this year above March of last year of over 5.8%, which was very good. And year to date, we're up 2.6%. A lot of that has been driven by our new Norfolk route as well, which is actually a route that we originally originated in Richmond, that we have now originated in Norfolk. And that service just started a month ago, but we are already up 2,700 monthly riders on the system because of that change. It also did create some changes on the Newport News line in the scheduling there, which also provides a new morning departure from Richmond Main Street Station, which has also driven some of that. But we're very happy to see that increase just due to that change in the schedules and the new train to Norfolk. So our Roanoke line also has been extremely successful. We, in March, our ridership was up 7.2%. So all very good news for us.
I choose to think of it as the Lynchburg train
Lynchburg
that
was
we
extended
actually
Roanoke.
share with Roanoke. Yes, that train.
That train,
Yeah.
exactly.
Mr. Dodson.
Yeah, that we went Lynchburg first. Roanoke wanted it for many years, so we get to Lynchburg first, then
In
to
my,
Roanoke.
in,
And you
in
and
my
I were on
mind, it's the Lynchburg train that we're actually sharing. We're hoping to extend even further, Mr. Smoot.
Yes, thank you for saying
Yes,
that.
I felt like I needed to clarify that, but.
And I know we've also briefed you before about our inner-city bus service, the Virginia Breeze. We had a great month in March, our largest ever ridership of 2,725 riders this month, so very, very good service for that. We are also in the middle of doing a study right now where we are looking at new inner-city bus routes around the state and potentially, and this is a really important service, to be able to connect some of the communities within Virginia that are not currently connected to the rest of the state with Amtrak or other services. So we are holding some public hearings right now and looking at new routes for that as well. So that's all I have. Yes.
I will just say that the Virginia Breeze, you know, is also an element of the 81 improvement study. So that multimodal connections, which in Northern Virginia or in Hampton Roads might seem somewhat ordinary or simplistic in a certain way, but the percentage that we never expected it to be quite so successful.
Oh, it's been huge. It's been
so
much
anyway.
much more than
Again, those
expected.
multimodal improvements included in the study. So thank you. From the Rail Committee, anything that you'd like to add from yesterday? I know Mr. Kasowitz misses that committee. I know. I know. Anything that happened. Okay. Thank you, Commissioner.
I just have two items. The first item at the March board meeting, we had a number of bids that came in, or projects that came in significantly over the estimate. And what I'll do is defer to Garrett to talk to you about what we're doing with regard to the cost estimating process. I'd say that we had 3 weeks between the last board meeting and this board meeting, so it was a very accelerated time frame for us to be able to make a significant amount of accomplishments with regard to cost estimating to be able to bring back to the board, but I anticipate this being a subject that we will most certainly bring back to the board at the May meeting and then subsequent meetings throughout the rest of the calendar year. So Garrett, I'll defer to you.
Madam Chairman and members of the board, I guess let me start with where we are, and what we're really have started the day of that board meeting is a major rework of how we do business on estimating. As we peeled back the onion, I think Mr. Whitworth and Mr. Miller asked the question, if I got it right, was this errors, process, or market? And the answer is yes, plus probably how we cost risk. And there's some other sources in there as we've walked through those projects. So, and all those are interconnected. So I don't want to get down into the nitty and gritty of it, but we're walking that back. And as we peeled back the onion, we found out more in the initial postmortem. The other thing that we've done is a conference call with industry. That was on March 29th. Kind of the big nuggets from them in costing was risk, that we need to do something better about how we account for that and what we do in our estimates and how they do it, and also labor as being very, very tight, and skilled labor in particular. They did mention in other areas increasing environmental requirements, not only in the number, but in how they are held accountable on them, that it is a higher level of I guess, adherence that's needed, which is in a rainy environment stuff is costing them more dollars and has to be accounted for. They did say that materials was more mixed, and actually steel and some other things they thought were stable. They did say that asphalt binder and fuel was increasing, but the big nuggets were risk and labor. Our immediate actions is to intensify our review, both on the ones that are already under advertisement and the ones that are coming up to advertisement, and then review some particular areas with scrutiny. And then the other thing that we're doing long-term is engaging national experts to come in and do an external review. And also industry has offered to do some post-mortems on some ones that we have had that have been bid and awarded, so we can go through and again do an analysis of what went wrong, so that we make sure that we've got a tighter control on this. And we're in the interim putting additional feedback loops and controls so that we're kind of starting the breathing and stopping the bleeding, because this is serious enough where it threatens our financial planning, and we just need to get that under control. So we're doing a near-term fixes, but we're also looking for something for long-term. But this is going to be a major rework that I see a major effort for us over the next 3 or 4 months, but that doesn't mean we're not doing anything right now. The things we're doing right now, though, are probably more of a hammer than a scalpel. So that's where we're at, and just wanted to report on where that is at, and that we're working on it right now.
Chairman, I think it's also, it's probably different in different environments in terms of why we would be off. But I
would say for each project there are some differences, and there are probably some commonalities in each of them.
I'm sort of speaking to a project that Mr. Malman knows well in Virginia Beach, and it's a lot of utility relocation risk, because so often you really don't know what's down there. So much stuff has been laid over time in the urban areas that's not well marked, and the locators don't always get it. And there's just a lot of risk associated with those dense environments to not power lines mostly, but communication lines and other things.
And that particular project, which is still under procurement, that's why I'm not, but we're looking hard at it again to try to get that back into where, and I won't go into that in an open meeting, but yeah, that's one we've got our full attention on.
You mentioned one of the factors they cited in the cost increases is the environmental compliance changes or increasing scrutiny on that. Do you know if that's state or federal level or a combination?
I think it's both. Some things have happened and I'll use, for instance, erosion and sediment control. When it rains, there is a perfection level that is expected and required that is difficult to achieve when you get beyond the design life of a 2-year design for temporary measures and so forth. So they're getting back in there, they're getting quickly, so it's trying to find that space that approaches perfection but is still practical, and I think it's moved a little bit more towards perfection and getting in quickly. Recently, the contractors in recent rain events have gotten some pretty good marks for it, but it does cost them money. I don't know if that answers the question.
I think so. I guess the other question I would have, and I know these were conversations that were held kind of anecdotally, but any indication of percentages or how these would add up from a, is the environmental issue 1%, 0.5%? How significant are some of the components that you looked at?
Some of the discussion, it was more than 0.5% or 1%. I think, and these are just numbers thrown around in a conversation, but this could be not an increase, but in 5 or 10, 15% of project cost. So, but again, that was not from a study. This was from discussions. We have not gone back and done any befores and afters on that. So that's why I'm hesitant to throw numbers out at this point. Yes, sir.
Is it our goal to go back though and try to quantify those with more precision? And
yes, and there's other things that we, for instance, we talked about on our estimating. We generally have a 2-year look back. And so, okay, if we've got and this is where it's tied in, if it is a market issue, why aren't we looking at the last 3 months and 6 months? Might not have as much data in there, but at least it can tell you if potentially a trend's coming. There's a lot of things that we really need to, I would say, the talk we've had internally is, if we're going to get this tighter, we need to put focus on this like we would on safety or something, because it's being done pretty well in some parts of the department, but you need to make that quality more uniform so we're not getting things that are as far out as they are. So we've kind of, within about a few days of looking at this, it became apparent I think we just need to rework how we do it to make sure there are a different set of controls and some different things in there. And I think that some of the things we may not know there's some things we can do immediately, but like anything else, there might be some things that as we look at the numbers, they happen 3 months from now. But immediately we're taking much more review time and varied review, so you get different experiences on it. That's kind of the immediate thing that we could do.
so is the combination of those steps that you'll take something that you'll report to the board on at some point to give us some indication?
In the coming months, May and June, I think this is maybe a monthly update at your pleasure. This is as we did on time and on budget, as we recovered bridges, as we recovered pavements, I see this as a focus area because we just, as you've identified to us, we've missed this and we just need to identify that it's a big problem and we need to focus on it and fix it.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Williams.
I don't want to speak to any particular project, but we're getting a lot of this, and a lot of this is just based on the market. It's just so tight. But some of these later ones are almost unexplainable. And I think there's 3 problems it creates. Number one, when the project was submitted to Smart Scale, its score was drastically affected by, of course, there's no bigger example than Route 7, but completely affected by the unreasonable price tag that had been put on it that proved to be completely off. So you're altering Smart Scale applications, and that's unfair to all the others that have submitted. You're also setting unreasonable expectations with the community. Some of these projects are projects these communities have been waiting on for decades, and they finally get them in Smart Scale, and they get them bid, and the results are so out of whack with what they were expecting that they are put in a position, because of how we fund projects, that they have to come up with the money. Now, they've been working with us all along, thinking, here's the project we want, and here's how we scored it, and then all of a sudden the bid comes in, and it's like that. So it's extraordinarily unfair to that community. And then the third thing, I always take up for the contractors because I represent a few of them, but they've bid the job, and their numbers are on the street. Everybody's got them. And so, they bid them unit price. That's how VDOT bids their projects. But yet, if you reduce the scope, it's my understanding Federal Highway typically tells us you have to rebid it if you change the scope, which makes no sense to me because they're unit price bid anyway. You just do less units, why couldn't you just do that? But I totally understand that's their rule. So it's extraordinarily unfair to your partner who is the contractor. And you know, these large projects, there's only a handful of these contractors that work, you know, are consistently in the running on these larger design build projects. So it's something that is a dire need of a fix because it messes up from beginning to end. And it's not fair to the communities, it's not fair to the other communities if you're a smart scale project, one, because it was so drastically underpriced, and it's not fair to our partners who are the construction industry that builds all these roads for us. And we need they need somehow, when it's this far off, we need a policy of how we deal with it. And I think the current policy is just completely unfair. And not intentionally on any of our parts, or any of VDOT's part, but it's grossly unfair to the communities and to our business partners.
Just a comment to follow Marty's. I think anytime we have a situation where we have cost differentials like we've experienced, human nature tendency is to overcompensate in some cases. So Marty mentioned the impact on smart scale and the cost being a driving factor in that. What I wouldn't want to see happen is that we end up overcompensating in our estimating process and in fact make the projects more expensive than they should or would be if they were actually bid. So this works both ways. It's a delicate balance between the two.
I agree.
For information purposes, when we make an estimate and the project is going to be 5 years out, do we have a inflation factor built in on that estimate?
Do. The only thing I'll say is that predicting inflation factors 3 and 4 and 5 years out, if I were that good or anybody was that good at it, I'd probably be in a much better financial position than I am right now. So there are standard factors that are used, and I think one of the things that we did look at, though, is in looking at market, since we have our system looks back 2 years, which is still close, but we need to probably look at a changing market to see if that's adjusting. So that's part of I think it may be what Mr. Williams is talking about. You've got something that's planned out 3 or 4 years, and you've got a certain initial estimate that was made. It's adjusted for inflation. What that looks like in that 4th year may be different, and you've got to be within that initial budget. I think that's part of what we need to talk about too, is how, if something's changing, how do we have an internal conversation that we bring to you that's happening. But to be candid, we had other things in here that were missed, sometimes actually to the advantage of being closer to the estimate in one case, but mostly the other way, that should not have been missed. And we need to do something with our internal process that even had this not been here, had it come to light another way, we'd have had to do something different. So there's a combination of things. Did that answer the question, or?
Well, yes, but it seems to me that today's inflation factor for next year is much more accurate than today's estimate of an inflation factor for 5 years.
Sure.
So wouldn't that suggest that where we have projects that are extended out, that there needs to be an annual revaluation of those estimates so we're not blindsided at the end of 5 years?
I think that's probably something we could look at to bring back as far as an adjustment of, call it across the board of our projects, that if, say, inflation went from 3% to 6%, that basically everything is inflated. That's something that could be, we could work with the CFO and see if that's something that we need to do. The other thing about that, though, is that's also kind of looking backwards, but at least you can, looking backwards, those things that are another 2 years off bump up some. I mean, once you've seen a 6% rate and something's going to be advertised in 2 years, you can at least catch up for the year that just happened. I don't know if that...
It can work in the reverse. It can go down.
Yeah, it could go down.
Which we've seen in past years.
Yeah, it could go down. And frankly, if we hit a recession, we'd probably see the other direction. So, sure.
Okay. Oh,
And
Mr.
Secretary,
Oh, I'm
Garrett,
sorry, Mr.
I appreciate that report, and I'm glad you're really getting after this issue and doing a deep dive to see how we can correct what appears to potentially a trend that was developing that has all the issues that Marty brought up. So I appreciate everything you're doing.
Just a couple concluding remarks on it. Certainly is what the chief engineer had said, that we'll be back in May, but I envision this being a, if not a monthly item, every other month item until we get this work through. To Mr. Whitworth's point, we have a number of projects that are already legacy projects that are already in the pipeline. We're working through those. I think we have some different cost estimating that will need to take place, because those projects that have already been in the pipeline, we know where those are. We have round 1 and round 2 smart scale projects that are there that had certain estimates. To Mr. Williams' point, we are recognizing what those risks were when we came back in October of last year, identifying that utilities and right-of-way and environmental concerns were some of the leading costs, and working through those. But also as we go into the round 3 estimates and what we've tried to put into place this year, but the inflationary factor is something that we're going to have to work through in this year and subsequent years. Boiling it down, it's really coming down to the process needs to be reevaluated. As the chief engineer said, that we will take this, peel this onion back, and then put it back together. But it's also the people, and making sure that people have the right training and the tools that are necessary for them to be successful. And that's part of the process teardown. And then certainly understanding the marketplace. If our people don't understand the marketplace, we can have the best tools that are put into place, but as the market conditions continue to change, we're going to need to be a little bit more dynamic in what we're doing. So we will be back in May. There's a lot of work to be done, and we recognize the credibility of the program rests with the basic concept of cost estimating. So there's a lot more forthcoming.
I will just say that, first of all, I really do appreciate the comments from all of you, and everything you have said is very true and accurate. The really good news, I think, from this is that no one wants to make this better, to fix this problem more than the commissioner and the chief engineer and the folks at VDOT. So they recognize it, they want to address the policy and be completely accountable and transparent about it. So I really do thank you for that.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
One more thing.
One more comment is maybe ending much more on a positive note, recognizing that the presentation that Nick gave yesterday about the I-81 program as a whole and the funding that we anticipate coming. Anticipating that coming, we've already, as I said yesterday, we had already convened a meeting with the district staff and our central office staff to be able to lean forward on a number of those projects that the board had identified as part of the plan of program. We'll probably be in a position where we want to advance a handful of those projects to show progress along the corridor, and hopefully at the May meeting be in a position to present just a handful of very small projects that were in that program that we can get up and underway very quickly to show progress. I envision potentially having some staff recommendations as well for the I-64 corridor for your consideration and for inclusion into the program at that point. But I wanted to give some update and not wait till May for that conversation to be had, but be in a prepared mode to be able to present staff recommendations. Again, not trying to circumnavigate the advisory committee on 81 that would need to be pulled together, but I think there's a handful that we can show progress come July 1st and leaning into the program and not waiting.
Mr. Williams. I know you are just getting your arms around it a little bit. From where we're leaving off at Bottoms Bridge to where we've left off on the third phase of the, what do you perceive in there? 2 phases, 3 phases to, assuming we were to
That's such a good
collect
question.
some revenue to do that, what do you see there?
What we had presented back last year, as well as what we took to the Joint Commission on Transportation Accountability in January, we've identified 4 remaining phases, at least 4 remaining phases. Now, can some of those phases then be, if revenues come in, and we're still working through the Department of Taxation on what that revenue stream would look like, can we truncate that and make a longer segment? Potentially, but for at least right now, we have bite-sized pieces that we would envision for 4 remaining segments. And what I would propose is that we take a look at those 4 remaining segments and bring that back into May and say, can we lean forward on one of those segments and get it in there until we understand the rest of the revenue stream?
Mr. Commissioner, with regard to your earlier comments on 81, what do you consider to be smaller projects? Give me a dollar number on that.
I think out of, I believe, the suite of 64 projects, there are a number of turn lane or acceleration and deceleration lane projects that range anywhere between, I want to say, $200,000 to maybe $500,000 in cost. These are very small scale projects that we can implement relatively quickly, potentially even with state forces or minimum planned projects that we can have out on the street relatively quickly. The dollar cost associated with it is probably no more than $500,000. I know that there's at least one of the projects that we were looking at, which was a chevron, installing chevrons at roughly $15,000 in construction costs. So these are, I would envision, very small scale projects. These are not your 10, 15, 20 to $100 million widening projects that still need engineering and environmental clearances associated with. These are going to be those that check all the boxes, that I've got environmental, I've got a permit, I've got the engineering, or can be done relatively quickly.
I couldn't agree more. A question I would have actually of Nick, does this have the potential of running foul with our committee where you've got other constituencies on that committee?
I will just, and certainly you can answer, Mr. Donahue, but what, what the commissioner is actually presenting would be draft recommendations to take to that committee. So that would be the process, very much like Smart Scale. We have draft recommendations, but ultimately it's working with, our districts, decision makers to try to determine how those Smart Scale dollars are actually going to be spent. So it's going to be in that same.
And I agree with that.
Yes. So none of this would be done without the consent of that 81 committee. Anything else? Okay, well, as I was sitting here, I know yesterday I asked you, I thought we needed to pause for a minute because lots of exciting things have happened. Besides the NCAA tournament, not that I want to bring that up again, but that took a lot of energy.
It's certainly worthy to bring up.
I know, it's certainly worthy. We're orange for many reasons. But I was really thinking, after being with all of you last night, the amount of work that's really taken place just in these past couple months. The fact that the General Assembly session, as Ms. Maxwell was presenting this morning, a lot of work working with the Governor's Office and the General Assembly on bills that we hope do not pass, understanding the consequences of many of those, but also helping to shepherd through important legislation, and of course the 81 plan, and not just presenting a program that ended with the General Assembly, but actually going through the convened session and coming up with a plan to actually get it done. That was, very remarkable. As we're going through that, I was thinking that we also announced $1 billion of new investment in Northern Virginia for 4 major projects: the Opitz Interchange, Occoquan, the last 2.5 miles of 495 to connect with American Legion Bridge, the close or very close close for FredEx. We're getting there, right, Mr. Lawson? But still, major contracts that we're still negotiating as we're going through this. the work with the Hampton Bridge Tunnel, selecting the contractor, signing the project agreement for funding administration, which took incredible collaboration with the General Assembly, HR TAC, all of us here, the term sheet of working through the tolling agreement with many of that. We launched a new service, rail service to Norfolk, and we have really started working very hard on a potentially transforming project with Long Bridge. And as we're doing that, we're preparing for visits to 9 transportation districts to hear the input from citizens and local officials on the impact of smart scale. Pretty challenging for all of us to recognize that the smart scale budget over the last 4 years has declined 45%. There was not one district that I didn't hear from that was disappointed in the outcome of the smart scale process. But once again, with leadership from so many in this organization going back, and because of timing issues and other revenue sources, being able to identify projects that could potentially be funded through a competitive process other ways so we can add additional dollars back into smart scale. So it's been just a tremendously, I think, important couple of months. None of that could happen without the people as part of the Secretariat, with VDOT, DRPT, and all the other organizations within transportation. Today, I would like to recognize one of those individuals, Morteza Farajan. He has been serving as acting deputy secretary for a number of months. And as I'm going through these projects, he was not only instrumental in helping us accomplish and move these projects forward, he has been there really from the 66 project. I mean, Morteza, I think that, do you mind coming up to the podium? I think that you have actually been a part of probably $14 billion worth of transportation projects in the Commonwealth of Virginia, which is just tremendous. And there is, having worked with Morteza, which has been such a pleasure, but really just a very tough financial negotiator and helping us kind of manage all of these projects. I think you came to VDOT in 2012?
Yes, January of 2012 I started.
And last night we were discussing, you have a PhD in?
It's project management, but my thesis was on financial structure of public-private partnership projects.
And I believe it was Mr. Kaspowitz who asked you, how many people in the world have that degree?
I did.
And you said?
I'm not aware of anybody else myself.
So we've been very lucky. But the reason I asked you to come up here is because you are taking a new position with USDOT. And do you want to share with us that new title that you now have?
Madam Secretary, so I'm joining USDOT as Executive Director of Build America Bureau. So Build America Bureau was created within USDOT to basically bring all of the grant programs, funding programs, credit programs across different agencies who report to Secretary of Transportation at federal level under one roof, to have one shop, one-stop shop, to be able to help different states. So that's on the funding and financing side. For example, programs like TIFIA, RIF on the transit side, those are all part of Build America Bureau. The Bureau is also responsible for providing assistance to the states who are trying to use some of those credit programs, who may not have internal resources. They want to build their internal resources and capacity. So there's a lot of education piece going on within the Bureau. The Bureau is also the liaison between USDOT and all of the projects who want to move forward. They're doing their environmental studies. So the Bureau is going to be the liaison with different permitting agencies, environmental agencies, streamlining that process, assisting those projects to move forward faster. So that's why the Bureau was created, to streamlining the process and helping some of these projects to move forward faster.
When Morteza let me know that he was being given this opportunity. And I remember sharing with you, and I said, professionally, no, don't do it. That is a terrible decision. And then I said, personally, I thought it was a really great opportunity for you. And and I was very honest about it. But Morteza has been working with us through this process. And I do have something that I'd like to read to you. Do y'all remember when we did this with Quentin? And he was on speakerphone. I mean, he's listening in because he wouldn't be there. And I think I had to get a light. Remember over in Norfolk, it was so dark? I think I can read this actually. So it says, whereas Morteza Farrajon was appointed as Acting Deputy Secretary of Transportation in Northern Administration September 7th, 2018, and whereas you have been Director of the P3 Office at the Virginia Department of Transportation since 2017, and during his tenure, Mr. Farrajon has had a dual role as both Acting Deputy Secretary and Director of the P3 Office, and as appointed, you have served as an appointed member of the Transportation Research Board, Revenue and Finance Committee, and P3 Subcommittee, whereas prior to joining VDOT 6 years ago, Mr. Farrajon worked in the private sector. They should say Dr. Farrajon worked in the private sector in a number of project management, construction, and development roles. And whereas the Northern Administration is grateful to have worked with Deputy Secretary Farrajon, and how we wish that the Governor of the Northern Administration wish you and your wife all the best in your future endeavors. It is my great pleasure on behalf of the Governor and all of us in this administration to thank you for your remarkable service to the Commonwealth and wish you sincerely the very best. So thank you so much. Is there anything else anybody would like to say as we head out?
Chair Morteza, I want to thank you for your patience with me in particular. I
will second that.
Well, we started this discussion back pre-66 days, and I think my knowledge of P3s could have been included in a single paragraph. And you helped me through the process, always with that calm demeanor and smile on your face. And back when I couldn't even put a coherent sentence together on P3 process. So you've been a great guide and teacher and I think motivator, helping us think through options to make the P3 program better. And I really thank you for that, and we wish you the very best with your new position.
Chairman, I know you won't show any favoritism in your new job, sir, but just remember us fondly as we come to work with you. Congratulations.
And you're going to be living in both places, right?
Yes, Richmond is home, so I will stay in Richmond, but of course I have to spend
I understand
most of my time
perfectly.
in DC during the week. Yeah.
Madam Chairman, I want to thank Morteza for his leadership of the P3 office. Certainly coming on board over the last 15 months, we've had the privilege of working through a number of high-profile projects, 66, FredX, continuing on with that, the negotiations associated with 495, and certainly bringing the procurement for HRBT to a successful conclusion. Certainly could not have been done without him. I'll say that the funny thing about this is when I first came on board, I was used to dealing with thousands and millions, and Morteza introduced me to a new word called billions. So I appreciate that. Thank you again for your leadership, Morteza.
So thank you very much, and I know that we have a couple weeks, I think, to kind of smooth out those transitions, so thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So as Morteza is ready to launch a new phase in his career, I am very pleased this morning to also announce that as Acting Deputy Secretary, we are now having John Lawson the Chief Financial Officer here at VDOT, actually come over and serve in that position. So John, we are very excited to have you come join us. For me, it's going to be a seamless transition because all of these projects that I mentioned, John Lawson has been there with us through the entire process. He's often not quite as loud as Morteza, but always instrumental in helping us move through the process. And so, you know, John, as I was reading through your resume, there's so many things that you have done, but I didn't realize that you were instrumental in establishing the infrastructure bank and getting us established with the Garvey program and then working through all of our P3 projects. In fact, the P3 office right now actually reports up through John. So he will be moving over with us in the Secretariat, which makes Nick Donahue very happy. Yes, we get to share this. So John, congratulations to you, and thank you so much for your willingness to come over and kind of take a more multimodal approach to all of this. So thank you. Yes, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a couple comments. First off, you know, I've had the privilege to serve VDOT for 31 years, and over that period of time, I've had great opportunities, great challenges. It's been really rewarding to have been part of so many great things that have happened over those years, whether it be projects, whether it be legislative initiatives, whether it be, you know, some of these funding programs. It's been great. I really enjoyed it, and I'm really looking forward to, and I'm honored to have the opportunity to take this to another level and serve the Commonwealth at a greater level and be involved in transportation in a broader way. So thank you.
Thank you for saying yes. And as Mr. Lawson comes over, we also have another great announcement, and that is Laura Farmer. Laura is going to serve at, you can come up to the podium too. Yeah, I should have said that from the beginning, Mr. Lawson, to have you come up there, so I apologize. So, Laura, congratulations. You are going to serve as acting Chief Financial Officer here. I didn't realize you were from Danville, which is kind of over closer. The Lynchburg District, Mr. Dodson, right?
Did you go to George Washington?
I did. Yes,
There you go.
My children went to Glass.
Oh, so sorry.
No.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, Mr. Miller. Yeah. Oh, and you can tell also, like incredibly honest. So, Laura, I know that you have worked hand in hand with John Lawson throughout this entire process, and all of the work that you have done to actually, with all the numbers that we need to get these jobs done, you have been right there with us. So I just offer you our sincere congratulations, and we also thank you for saying yes.
Opportunity.
So thank you. So we'll look forward to the transition, and anything that we can do to help support you, we are here. Okay, and so, oh God, we have a whole action meeting. Okay. Do we have anyone signed up for public comment?
No, nobody has signed up.
Okay. Do I have a motion on the minutes?
So moved.
Second. Oh, yeah, we haven't moved. I probably need to move in. Okay, hold on one second. We are going to adjourn the workshop. We are now going to convene the action meeting. I was having so much fun with this. I thought, oh gosh, we have a whole action agenda. Sorry, Mr. Williams. Okay.
Will the minutes be approved?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Thank you. All right, Ms. Keene, good morning.
Madam Secretary, members of the board, I have two action items for you this morning. The first is a limited access control change for the Route 15 at Edwards Ferry and Fort Evans Road in the Northern Virginia District. This project replaces 2 signalized intersections with 2 grade-separated interchanges and includes sidewalks and a shared use path along with the project in the town of Leesburg. The design public hearing was held on May 31st in 2018, and the town council has endorsed the project in a resolution dated July 2018. This control change does not require federal highway approval, and the total estimated cost of this project is $110 million. I request CTB approval for this modification of the limited access control for this project.
Madam Secretary, I move approval.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Second is a limited access control at the interchange on I-81 at Route 11 or Exit 5 in the Bristol District. This is in the city of Bristol, and these improvements include widening Route 11 from 4 to 6 lanes and improvements to the interchange. The design public hearing was held January 31st, 2019, and the city manager endorsed this project in a letter dated January 22nd. Federal Highway has approved this control change in a letter dated March 2019. The total estimated cost of this project is $6 million, and I request CTB approval for this modification of the limited access control for this project.
I move approval.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Ms. Pryor. Good morning.
Madam Secretary, members of the board, I have 2 items for you today. The first is the amendment of 8 projects to the 6-year improvement program. These are all funded either with local funds or funds through an MPO, RSTP, or CMAQ, and I recommend your approval.
Okay.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Thank you. The second item is the normal monthly transfers. I do need to point out to you that Carol has put a revised version of the transfer report on the Google Drive. There was a slight modification to 3 of the transfers in Richmond District. The amount shown was higher than the actual transfer we processed. So 2 of them actually came off the list that require your approval. So with that slight modification, I recommend your approval of the monthly transfers.
Cool.
Is Mr. Brown aware of those changes?
Mr. Brown was briefed on the correct amount, and we inadvertently showed the incorrect amount.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Mr. Carey. Ta-da.
Chair. Good morning, and I did want to take 1 second to just remind everybody that we have about 2,500 workers out there today on a beautiful day like this, and it's Work Zone Safety Week. See a lot of orange around the room, and thank you for that, but not only our workers, but then all the contractors as well. Don't want to lose sight of that this week. Good morning. I'm here to follow up on last month's presentation on the utility relocation working group that was led by Mr. Williams. Just to remind you that that group was comprised of members from utility companies, contractors, localities, as well as VDOT staff. The group began in November of 2018 and held 5 meetings through last month. And separate meetings were also held with the contractors group, looking into design build projects, as well as a separate meeting with localities on locally administered projects. That working group made 10 recommendations that are in a resolution before you today, and I'm here to recommend your passage of the resolution with those 10 recommendations, as well as a commitment that VDOT would follow up on the implementation and effectiveness of those recommendations by July 1st of 2021.
Madam Chair, I'd move the resolution first and then speak to it briefly. This group was put together the right way. We had all the players at the table, and it was really meant. Number one, we decided early on it was not going to be punitive. We're not looking for someone to punish. What it really was an exercise in getting everybody on the same page, everybody working through the same set of rules, and everybody applying the same culture to how they interacted. You hear about these utilities and the risk, and Mr. Board constantly reminds us that the financial matters that come up with these utility relocations. This is not a fix-all for any of that, but this is certainly something that's going to make the process a lot better for everyone involved. And I look forward to the implementation, and quite frankly, I look forward to the enforcement. You know, we have to hold everybody's feet to the fire. If we're going to have one page to look at, everybody better be working off of it, and it is going to make it much better. So I think we went a long ways with it.
Mr. Williams, I will just say thank you so much for speaking up last year and your willingness to take this. You volunteered, kind of.
I don't remember doing that.
Maybe
anyway,
you just spoke up.
Whatever.
But no, I really do appreciate it. This has been an issue for so long. So that, again, just more good work being done. So thank you very much. Any other comments? Mr. Carey, thank you for your leadership on this as well. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Thank you. Mr. Capel, saw you in the back of the room.
Morning, Madam Secretary, members of the board. I have one project for your consideration this morning. It is a design-build project on Route 15 and Route 29, improvements to Vent Hill and Fauquier County, Culpeper District. We had one contractor submit on this project, and after conducting our bid analysis, we recommend that the bid represents both market and a good value to the Commonwealth, and are recommending for your award.
Moved. Any further discussion?
Comment on this.
Mr. Castro, are you kidding? No.
No, this is, I think, by everyone's standard, a very challenging job, very short cycle. It's measured in weeks rather than months or years. It's happening during the summer season, so this work can be dispatched before, you know, school buses are back on the road and all. So I understand that it's been a challenge to even get a single bidder, and it did fall within the VDOT estimate. So.
And I just also have to thank the commissioner and our chief engineer for helping to navigate the decisions regarding Vent Hill and working with the community there. So thank you. Anything else? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Thank you. Any new business?
Secretary, I would just say we'll look forward to seeing everybody in Northern Virginia in May. Oh, too bad, because we have some fun things planned. So we'll.
Not as much walking as the last time I was.
Not as much walking, but it was good for you, Marty. Less walking.
Well, we are looking forward to it, coming up to Northern Virginia, so I know we need to finalize the agenda for that, so we'll be doing that. Also, just want to thank Mr. Carey again for bringing up the orange. I don't have a lot of orange, so I'm really grateful for my pen. This is Work Zone Awareness Week. I'm always shocked by the numbers of crashes involving our work zone. More than 2,000, 2,500. It is shocking to me, and it's always heartbreaking to get the phone calls. I will say that part of what inspired me to go to the vigil on the day off and just saying I have to go were really the video that the communications team had put together last year with Jimmy Harris, Brian Carr, and Hank Cook, who I remembered had driven the crash cushion, and he was the one who was hit first, and looking at the video, and I kept thinking about Jimmy Harris in that video saying, be safe for yourself, be safe for everybody else. Nobody wants to go home at the end of the day knowing that you've hurt or killed anyone. And it truly is a responsibility, and I appreciate all the work that VDOT and the commissioner put into making us far more aware, and the leadership from the executive director, Marshall, to really bring this to everyone's attention. So just thank you. Please be careful. Anything we can do, as you're saying, Mary, yesterday, how do we make this more real for people and understand what the real implications are? So Marshall, after this week, what comes up next? We could, I didn't mean for you to have to do that.
Yeah, well, later this month, we will be putting out the results for the USA VA digital town hall survey on distracted driving. That'll come out later this month. Messages will continue from the 5 agencies that are part of the governor's executive leadership team on highway safety in general, along with pedestrian safety, seatbelt safety, and distracted driving. Thank you.
So with that, Mr. Williams, we're adjourned.
Docket.
Phone, my dear.
Thank you. I'm taking the train.
See you in June.
Me.